I want to welcome everyone to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I am, FYI, item 3, Councilman Gates will be joining us on the phone about 2 o'clock, so I'm going to hold that until he's on the phone. Item 2 is the street landscape maintenance. Ray and James would like to come up and tell us what you're up to.
Sure. Madam Chair and members of the council, this is a item that was identified during the core review process that was done citywide last year. The two departments, Streets and Parks Department, found an opportunity that they could collaborate together to hopefully achieve efficiencies and better services for the city. So they're here today to explain the concept they've been researching and to get your approval.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, as Lisa mentioned, at the core review, the comprehensive organizational review last summer, we evaluated the street landscaping situation and came up with this proposal that you'll see today. So the Streets Department and the Parks Department, we split the responsibilities for street landscaping right now. Ray's department does all the design, the actual improvements, builds the roads, the curbs, the gutters, installs the landscaping and irrigation. And then since the mid-1960s, it's turned over to my department, Parks and Recreation, and we do the maintenance. We do the annual pruning, the water check, the irrigation maintenance, the weed control, and all the trash collection along all the major arterials, which, as the city has grown, has become quite a big deal. So this includes eliminating visual obstructions, which are part of really the transportation system where people can't see the signs, the turn signals, the stop signs, or information on the roadway. We prune the plants, do the weeds, and applying herbicides, as mentioned, staking and removing trash. Trash pickup's one of the bigger items because these are public thoroughfares and things are coming out of vehicles all the time. We do not take care of the landscaping along the commercial properties on these major arterial streets or along lands that are maintained by the homeowners associations, like apartment complexes or some of the newer subdivisions. Just for background, the street landscaping in the city of Phoenix is 755 miles. It's like seeing a crew of 21 people maintaining the road from here to San Francisco and back. If you kind of visualize that, everybody walking along with a wheelbarrow and a rake, you're probably not going to see them very often. So as it currently is, we are reactive and dealing with complaints only in the park system, in the street right-of-way system with our park staff. And this just gives you a visual on what has gone on over the last decade. As FTEs have dropped, we're down to about 21 in the park system right now. But the acres of street landscaping has increased continually as roads have been added either by development process or by Ray's capital improvement program. I'll turn it to Ray.
Thanks, Jim. So moving into Street Transportation Department, as Jim stated, they mainly do all the arterial streets. We do have the charge to maintaining on the freeways, and that was made many, many years ago with the negotiations that we did with Maricopa Association of Governments and ADA. So we have the responsibility of maintaining a lot of that infrastructure for landscaping and litter control. Through that process, we don't have staffing that does the work. We actually have a contractor that does that work. And we do have other unimproved areas where we do have staff, our general maintenance, street maintenance that deals with the unimproved areas of land that they don't have landscaping. And since 2009, because of the challenges that we were seeing with parks and helping us try to maintain and operate the landscaping, we've since taken over any new landscape retrofits, projects that we've done. We've taken over those, and we come through the budget process to get funding for those, and we add those additional miles. There could be traffic circles, detention basins. We add those to the existing contract that we have. And so with those challenges that we've had across the last couple of years, that's what we've been doing, a lot more contract work outside with a contractor and doing that. And again, we also have somewhat a reactive, complaint-driven type of situation in some of these cases. Just looking at the landscaping maintenance on arterial street, we do have challenges with the maturity of the landscape, just the removal and things that die, trees that die, and as you can see, some of the potential weeds. I'll show some pictures about what is a standard maintenance and what is not standard. So, and seeing some of the challenges that we have with landscaping maintenance. So this shows an area that just has very minimal landscaping maintenance with regards to how we're picking up trash, and this is the type of calls that Jim would get through a complaint-driven type of call saying, hey, there's nobody maintaining this. So obviously Jim would on a complaint-driven call, would go out there and maintain this. Here's another one that we typically have. There's straight, narrow areas along certain corridors where there's weeds, there's things that don't need constant landscaping maintenance, but occasionally after either rainfall or something like that, that has some vegetation growing, then we'll sometimes get those calls to go and Jim's folks go out there and clean this. Here's sort of a more maintained landscaping parkways that some of the arterials are seeing. Again, there's combinations of what what Parks is doing with the light rail corridor, because they do have contracts for the light rail. But some of these are areas that have contracts, or they're in partnership with the commercial residents or HOAs that are along these arterial streets. So going into some of the options that we have looked at, the first option would be no change. It stays in basically in Parks venue, and it would still maintain. We would still maintain that same service. Basically, it's a complaint-driven service. The budget for that right now is about 1.2 million. That accounts for about 21 full-time employees. So that would be an option, either do nothing, basically, just do the same thing that we're doing right now. The next one would be the option 2 would be is taking that funding that is allocated for those 21 full-time employees and using that as a model to do contract work and seeing if the market, the landscape contracting market could possibly take over and have some performance measurements to make sure that we could arrive to 3 times per year, plus complaint driven, and try to tackle that landscaping along the corridor. So that's one option that we've been considering. We have had some discussions with the unions, Unit 1 in particular. So we do need to have some level of staffing to oversee that, and we don't have enough staffing as indicated. We do need about 5 to 6 people to manage that contract. So we would be looking at using that funding to not only get some staff, but also contract that out. And then the next option 3 and 4 is basically adding to the program. And obviously, I mean, we're in challenging times right now. So those, as you can see, option 3 and option 4 is more service, more level of service in tackling the landscaping out there. So right now, we're considering option 2. We just want to lay out all the options to you all to make you aware that's what we're looking at, and kind of moving to the next process for that.
And just to echo on what Ray's saying, so the proposal is to transition this to the Streets Department, have them contract out and find out what the market is. And I have kept a number of vacancies in my department to equal this 21, so we can shift the people that are currently doing street landscaping back to the parks assignments, have them do work that is not being done today in the parks, take those vacancies and use that dollar amount to do the outsourcing that Ray just recommended.
I have a quick question. We just saw a preliminary trial budget. Which amount is in that trial budget? Do you know?
The base amount of 1.2 million and the 21 FTEs that's in parks.
Thank you. Did you have a question, Councilman?
Yeah, out of that 1.2 million, how much of it is personnel?
That's all the personnel.
So all 1.2 million would then go where?
The options.
To the streets budget,
And what happens to the 21 FTEs?
they're eliminated. And then I absorb the people that are in those positions, the current vacancies elsewhere in my department. So no one gets laid off.
So, okay, so what I'm hearing is there's 21 FTEs currently doing this job or this job. 1.2 million then would go to transportation, to streets. You have 1.2 million in your budget right now to absorb the 21 FTEs.
21 vacant positions, which it would equal that same amount of money, yes.
It would equal, or would they be, will it be a lateral move? I mean,
Madam Chair and Councilwoman Pastor, you might want to, Jim, you probably want to mention that most of these folks are actually working in parks, and they're being taken out of that area.
But yeah, they're the same pay grade, so the same job
Same people.
classification between gardeners and groundskeepers and some gardener sprinkler assigned. So we would move them into the same classification, but in a current vacancy in parks, and they'd be assigned to parks. That would free up the 21 positions. They're all street landscaping, that budget to go to Ray's department.
okay, I just need it's a process thing. So the 21 FTEs would go to parks, and they would be doing the same position, or they would be applying for a new position, or they would be, how would that work?
They would just get assigned to a different vacant slot in my department. It'd be the same grade, same classification they're in. Their job assignment would be working in a park site instead of working in street landscaping.
Okay, so they would still be doing landscaping for a park?
Correct, but just in a park or at a
That's-
community center.
That's the clarity I
Oh,
need.
I'm sorry, okay.
I didn't know if there was a position for something else. Okay.
Do you have any questions, Councilwoman?
I have a few questions. Will you talk about our we have some people who are very familiar with particularly maintaining trees and some of the sort of academic background in understanding landscaping maintenance. How would they be? No changes, and they are mostly in parks, I think?
Yes, the Parks Forestry crew, which is where most of those experts reside, would still be in parks. So we'd still be dealing with the very large trees in the city parks and on other city properties, say a fire station or Human Services Center or something. And then if there was a summer storm event, say, and trees are blown down in the right-of-way, which happens almost every summer, somewhere in town, Ray staff or the police department staff will call my department after hours, and we'll send crews out to clear the right-of-way. So we'll still have that skill set, and that's separate and not a part of this packet. This is just the basic level of maintenance for picking up the trash, taking care of the vegetation and irrigation.
Great. We've talked about in the past that we've been designing less intense landscaping to try to reduce maintenance costs. I think perhaps short-sightedly that we might regret having not as many trees along our streets. Can you talk about whether how that would impact?
Madam Chair and Councilwoman, we've been looking at what are the standards that we need to provide, also abiding also with regards to tree and shade procedures that we've been working with parks. For the most part, I think our challenge is more the maintenance and making sure that whatever we put down and when we start the project, we have that long-lasting, and again, understanding how we can go back and fill in the gaps when we have trees that are, that die and things of that nature. In addition, we're working right now with some procedures and policy potential changes that we're working with Parks and Public Works to look at how can we work together, because there's some conflicts with some of the city ordinances that we have, as you can imagine.
Theme of today's meeting.
So we're looking at how can we best codify those and modify those that are in the best interest of the nature of the trees that we're going to be putting along these corridors. So I think it's a furthering discussion that we're going to have with our designs. There are some challenges with putting too much vegetation, because then we have visibility problems. We have issues with trees being overgrown, and then we have aspects of operations and how we're dealing with these trees, both from a street transportation, a parks, or eventually not parks, but public works operations. So I think it's a continuing aspect that we're looking at and trying to make sure that we're putting the right tree in the right place. And that's some of the aspects that we've been working towards with the tree and shade policies that Parks has been driving across the city.
Well, this was one of the things I brought up in the budget meetings last year as an area where I felt we had cut too deeply and that we were seeing some really negative impacts. And complaint-based systems, I think, are not good for certain areas of the city, including many of which the three of us represent. And it, I think, was a disproportionate decline in service in the areas the three of us represent. So moving towards regular service that's not complaint-based, I think, is a very positive step forward. And I'm glad that we're moving in that direction.
Well, from my perspective, it seems we'll have greater efficiency if it's all in one department. We don't have any crossover and confusion on who we're supposed to call to go do it. I think it's a good idea. I would like to see, of course, more street maintenance and no more tall trees planted under power lines. I bring that up at every meeting because it drives me crazy when I see those weird shaped trees that really no longer provide shade, and they're scary. But anyway, I'm glad to hear you're doing some revision. So if that is the amount that is in the budget and the balance is in the budget already, I would love to have a different option, but quite frankly, unless revenue is identified beyond that, if we're fortunate enough that you have some new revenue in the future, I would then ask you to bring it back for further consideration. But at this time, I think option one is probably our choice to go with.
I'm sorry.
Two, pardon me, yeah.
One option is we could ask, I've been talking with the city manager about providing citizens at the budget meetings options about we could do additional things and here are revenue sources you could consider, and that way they can weigh some of the things that we weigh about, there's obviously anytime you have a new revenue source, there's negative sides of that, but the benefits maybe outweigh that. And so perhaps we could recommend to the city manager that this is an item they present as an option
Oh, okay.
at the budget hearings, and then we can get feedback from our community about whether it's something they support.
Okay. Well,
I agree with that.
do you want to make motions?
I move that we accept staff's recommendation with the addition of speaking with the city manager's office about providing revenue options for a higher level of service
Okay.
and discussing them at the budget meetings.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion?
I want one further. It said 6 staff on option 2. Where would that 6 staff come from?
It would be from the, Madam Chair and Councilwoman, it would be coming from that funding. Out of the 1.2, we would reduce that 1.2 to about 880,000. And that amount, about 350,000, would be to grow, because right now I literally have one person in our department that we lost another person. We had a horticulturist, so we would be to grow the expertise, the skill set, and the monitoring that we need to do the 3 times per year monitoring of that maintenance.
So out of that 21 FTE, 6 would go with you?
The balancing of that, most likely, but it's basically the funding, and it's the funding that we're going to be taking from those 21 full-time employees. So the difference would be 15. I mean, basically, that would be the difference.
But they are a different skill set because we'll be
It's
managing
totally different.
contracts and inspecting work rather than physically out there
Doing
doing
the
the
work.
landscape work. So it won't be my actual people going to his department
No.
to do that.
So
Okay.
then New
Different,
hires?
it would be a different skill set. It would be city employees, ranging from a horticulturist to a contract person monitoring that. It wouldn't be
Field
like a
inspector.
field inspectors, but it wouldn't be a tree trimmer. It wouldn't be that type of skill set.
I guess where I'm getting at is I'm visualizing or thinking 1.2 million will be moving over to streets. 21 FTEs are going to stay with parks. You're saying out of that 1.2 million, you're going to 350,000 will be taken from that
That amount.
budget, that amount, and that's what you'll use to hire.
Hire city staff. City staff. The 881,000 would be used to hire a contractor to do the work.
Those 21 FTEs will stay solid in the parks?
Yes.
Okay, that's where I'm
So
getting.
you're talking 27 employees?
Yeah,
Or are you talking 15 employees?
yeah.
That's what the confusion reigns. It's 21 employees that are currently doing the street landscaping work.
Correct.
I'll have 21 vacancies I'll move them into, and Ray will get all the money. And he'll
Right.
allocate it differently than what we're doing it today. He'll allocate it to 6 city employees and the rest all to contract. So the net change to the whole city will be I'll eliminate 21 positions. I will move people into the current vacancies I have, and then there'll be 6 new positions in his department.
Okay, that's what we were trying to
Sorry.
discuss.
Okay.
6 new positions.
Yes.
Just did the math on the salary, and it looks like it's the same salary for the people doing the field work as people administering the contract? Within $1,000? Or
Nope.
compensation, I would guess it's compensation, not
Yeah, it's
salary.
compensated. So, Madam Chair and Councilwoman, we've made some estimates with this. We need to further refine those estimates and the type of positions, because we have not defined, okay, it's going to be this type of skill set, this type of skill set. So we need to work with Parks to figure out what exactly that skill set positions are going to be to better define that number. Right at this point, we kind of took an estimate.
And I have committed to the manager's office and to Ray, as council approves this and we take this transition, that we're still going to be involved for the next year or so, because we have 30, 40 years of history, and we know every piece of landscaping out there. We have maps. We know where the 700 valves are and the 850 controllers, and he's not going to be able to just hand that to a contractor and say, good luck. So there'll still be some liaison and coordination, but I think Ray's right. We haven't split that 6 positions exactly what positions they are yet.
And I'm sort of alluding in it with my earlier comments, but I would love it if there's still some training in horticulture and the scientific background and understanding that is involved in managing, because I think that background does help us get
Absolutely.
more bang for our buck out of our investments in landscaping.
Hearing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will go to item number 4. So Ray, don't run away. We're gonna do Street Transportation Department procedure for calculating yellow change intervals at traffic signals.
Yes, Madam Chair. This is just a presentation regarding our traffic signal timing that we have with regards to the yellow change intervals. I'll kind of run through this. I think there was a question by a committee member to talk about this and have a short presentation. So there's no action for this. It's just information only. Tom Godby is also going to join me. He's Deputy Director over our Traffic Services Department here. Sorry. You want to do this?
Sure. Thanks, Ray. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, what we're going to talk about this afternoon is basically how cars travel through an intersection and how the city, specifically the Street Transportation Department, calculates the yellow interval. What we're showing here is a typical dilemma zone. It's that decision-making point everyone encounters when they go through an intersection, a point where it's a point of no return, or you're at a position where you can continue through the intersection or not. So it really depends on where you're at and what your speed is. The yellow change interval is between 3 and 6 seconds. Phoenix uses a minimum of 3 seconds, maximum of 5. If the calculations is more than 5, which is typically on a high-speed facility, we'll apply the extra second to our all red calculation. So that's typically how we do it today. The way we calculate it, we use an equation. The perception and reaction time of a typical driver to get through an intersection is about 1 second. So they're traveling as they make that decision as they perceive the light change, they're traveling in that 1 second period. We also use a posted speed limit for that particular street. The deceleration rate of 10 feet per second squared, and the roadway grade, which is normally 0 in Phoenix. We don't have a lot of hills and that type of thing, so that's typically 0 in the calculation. So this is how it's done in Phoenix and throughout most jurisdictions in the country. Most state jurisdictions use this calculation as well as agencies. The calculation is based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers equation, which is fairly standard throughout the country. This is a simulation that we're showing of a car stopping before entering the intersection and kind of what happens, assuming there's a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit, they're traveling 51.5 feet per second. Light changes to yellow, they can stop. They have plenty of time to stop based on the the speed that they're going and when they perceive the change in the light. The car stopped in 3.6 seconds. This is a car that continues through the intersection. Same type of scenario, the car is traveling when the light is green, has plenty of time to get through the intersection. The light may change before they actually exit the intersection, but that's okay, because legally they entered the intersection when it was safe to do so within that change interval. That concludes the simulation and the presentation. With that, I'll take any questions.
Is every intersection analyzed for the timing?
Yes. Yeah, the calculation is run for every intersection in the city. We double check it from time to time, but there's a calculation run for every intersection. Because
And although you
the
have-
speed limits may vary and the
That's-
conditions may vary.
Speed limits is what our next question is, because we know what the posted speed limit is, but we
Right.
also probably know what the average speed the cars travel at, which is different.
Correct.
Is that taken into consideration?
We typically just operate under the speed limit. Some jurisdictions do assume that people travel a certain amount above the speed limit. It's pretty standard for most agencies to use the speed limit, which is what we do in Phoenix.
Questions? No?
I have a question.
ahead.
So if we were operating faster, because most of us, try to stay within the speed limit,
Right.
but some operate with the 35 to 43, 40, 43, depending.
55?
Do we even look at that, or is that what's considered, maybe we add 5 and then?
Well, there's a factor of safety built into the calculation anyway, so there is a little room for people who are going slightly above the speed limit. It's already built into how we set the timing, so it's already accounted for. But if someone is going 50 or 55 in a 35, then we obviously couldn't account for that
Right.
in the calculation, and they could get into trouble and run a red light.
Right. The only reason I'm asking is because on the 7s, they're not operating at 35, in particular in the morning and in the afternoon. So that's why I'm asking, because I'm assuming those lights are probably a little longer, the yellows, only because of the traffic and everything else.
They're based on the speed limit,
Okay.
so, that calculation.
And Madam Chair and Councilwoman, also, we every year we go through and analyze all these different corridors. And sometimes when we get different calls from inquiries, I mean, we do go out and analyze that corridor. And sometimes we do change the speed limit in certain areas depending on, the curvature, the design of the geometrics of that corridor. So it depends on the location, but we also, we try to get input from citizens and then try to adjust accordingly within the parameters that we have.
Do you, also, you briefly mentioned having all 4 lights red at the
Yeah,
same
no,
time.
yes.
Do you do that and calculate in the number of accidents at a certain intersection?
We do. We have an analysis where we look at citywide red light running crashes. And we also, in Phoenix, include an all-red calculation, which includes the width of the intersection, how long it takes to get across an intersection, and also the speed. So our intersections in Phoenix do have all red, and we have a list that we provide to the police department for enforcement purposes, and where we put our traffic cameras for photo enforcement, they have a list. So we do know where we have a trend of red light running crashes. And then we can make some adjustments in the signal timing and double check those intersections to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure they're operating safely.
And do you do a year-to-year comparison to see if it had a positive impact?
With the red light cameras, yes, we have that data as well, and we can share that with you if you like.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
So on the all red, does every intersection with sort of full signals, turn lights and everything, they all have a few second period when they are all red?
Through the cycle. And Tom, can you elaborate?
Correct. We program pretty much every one of our signals. I have to check to see if they all have all red, but it's a common practice for us to use all red at our signals, especially at our major intersections throughout the city.
And if we had an intersection like 7th Street and McDowell, which is one where we have photo enforcement and we've been particularly, I think, trying to reduce crashes, is it a longer all red at that signal or?
Again, it's based on the width of the intersection. So when you have a really wide intersection, we'll extend the all red to a maximum time of about, I think, slightly over 1 second. So it's really a function of that calculation I discussed earlier. It's really different at every intersection, but one of the key components is the width of the intersection. How long does it take that car at that speed to clear the intersection?
Wonderful, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question for Councilman Gates. He would like to know if we could pilot an area with a longer yellow light interval. And you can get further details from him. But if
Sure.
there's a possibility to do that, and I'm not sure what area, what intersection.
Okay. Go ahead.
Madam Chair and Councilwoman and the councilman as well, certainly we can look at that. I think our challenges are going to be that we're abiding by these standards of practice that are used across not only the region but across the nation. So we're needing to make sure that we're within those parameters, and certainly we can look at one of those. But I think if we fall away from those areas, we might have some challenges and
Increased liability for one.
exactly, because we're starting to add certain things that are not a standard of practice. And for the most part, unless there's an issue of a location, when you're extending the yellow, as Tom stated, typically they're in higher speeds locations, and we do have some of those locations, in areas that are less populated, but we're trying to be within those parameters that we have.
Yeah, the concern is when you have excessively long yellow intervals, people tend to know that and they'll tend to cheat a little bit. So that's why we're very particular about the calculation that we use, so that there's an expectation by the driver based on that corridor of what the yellow would be. Because if you make it too long, I think people are going to cheat a little bit and think they have a little extra time, and it may be different at the next intersection.
So you will go meet with Councilman Gates and.
Certainly.
Thank you.
To that question, though, the lighting, to the question is when, and I know I'm going off on a,
Yeah.
but it coincides with this. The walking signs, and you get the numbers 1, 2, 3. Some of them, when I look at some of those signs as I'm traveling, and it's going to go to
0.
to the hand to stop, I'm expecting the light to go to yellow and then red. And in some of them, they're not going to yellow, they're maintaining green. That's
really
another
a function of the
timing?
actuation on the side street.
Okay.
Because we've gotten that question from other people, because if there's no actuation on the side street or no pedestrian actuation, then it won't
Activate.
It won't activate.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, only because it has to do with the yellows too.
Right.
Thank you.
So we're slowing down unnecessarily, is that what he's trying to say? No, I'm just teasing, just teasing. Any other questions? No? Well, we thank you very much for coming and giving the report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda, I believe, is the bus stop shade study.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Jesus Sapien with Public Transit. With me is Jill Bauer, who oversees the route planning and ridership analysis, and Herb Munoz, who oversees the installation and oversees maintenance of our bus stops. We're here to you today with you today to discuss an item which was an aspect of our CIP, our 5-year CIP that we discussed last time we were here. And what we wanted to do was provide you with an overview of some recent work that we conducted and what we feel are positive results as a result of those analysis and that field study. So what we did is we worked with a consultant to look at what shade structures and unshaded structures, which are the calls that your offices get, to what extent we can verify that those are out in the field, and what we can do to address those long term. So what we want to do is address some of those complaints. We want to document what the conditions are at specific stops. And we want to really assess the magnitude of the problem, because the calls that you get are the individuals who might be waiting at a particular stop in the hotter months, that it might be a newer stop, it might be a stop with less frequency on that particular bus route. And then we compare that with ridership analysis, and we'll get into that analysis as we go through. And so that'll help us prioritize long-term the installation of bus stops and shade structures that we'll do out in the field. So what we have is we have a little bit over 4,000 stops throughout the city. Now, some of them are simply a sign because they have a lower ridership. Some of them are major intersections, so we have things like a bench, a shade structure, a trash can perhaps. And what happens as a result of installing this infrastructure throughout the city is the maintenance that comes along with it, and how we service those long term. So what you see here is 70%, in other words, the top two lines where we have a shade structure or other shade, and I'll get to some pictures here in a few minutes. 77% of our bus stops are currently shaded. 63% are with a shade structure that we, the city, actually put in. 14% there's some other shade structure that is adjacent to that particular stop. Again, I'll get to some pictures. That might be a tree, a building, things like that. And so what we want to address is the last two, where we have no shade, but we have adequate right-of-way, where long-term planning or even short-term, we can address those. And then the areas where we have no shade, but we have inadequate right-of-way. And what we're going to show you is what I like to call some of the more egregious offenders, where, again, some of the calls that your office gets, where we would love to put something in, but you'll see in the pictures coming up that, it's hard because it's someone's, there's no right-of-way, there's no infrastructure. In some cases, it's someone's private property. So here we have some examples of shade structures that we have in place. Again, what we do is that we analyze the ridership on our routes using two different methods. The fare collection system tells us every time someone pays where they are getting on a bus. We also have a system called APCs, automated passenger counters, on our bus that tells us where people are getting off and getting on, and making those transfers. So Joe's group does a good job of analyzing that data and correlating it with our bus stops, because every one of those fare collection events, anytime someone pays, it's geocoded. It tells us the latitude and longitude of where they got on. So some pretty sophisticated things are going on every time someone hops on a bus, and then we can correlate it to where people are riding, and then adequately put these types of structures in the right spots. So these are examples of a lot of the shade structures that we have. Again, some of them are pretty plain. Some of the newer ones, we are doing advertisements, and that brings in revenue for the city. These are examples of stops with other types of shades. So again, we have a stop in some areas where you have a building, most likely it's a tree, and in areas like this, we would not put those at the top of our priority list because there's some other type of shade structure available there as passengers wait. And again, it also depends on the historical ridership where people are boarding, and the frequency of the route. So we're going to look at putting these types of structures at routes that have a higher frequency, the 15-minute frequency versus the 60-minute frequency, for example. These are examples of stops with no shade and adequate right-of-way. So these are areas where we could do something in the future because the right-of-way is there, and there's the space where we can put something in, not only from a right-of-way aspect, but also an ADA aspect. Whenever we put something in subsequent to the Americans with Disabilities Act, we want to make sure that there's adequate landing platform for anyone who might be using any type of mobility aid. So these will be on our list of future projects where we would put something. The calls that your offices get that we always go out into the field and investigate are these type of situations where there's no shade and unfortunately there's inadequate right-of-way. We deal with some county islands, some private properties, some areas that have not been improved, where these stops were put in prior to the ADA, and they're still there because we still provide service. However, there's not the infrastructure needed to do things like lighting for the bus stop and things like that. Here's a couple of other examples of right-of-way challenges where there's someone's private property, there's another type of structure, a business, a fencing, something like that, where unfortunately we go out there, we look at them on a case-by-case basis, and sometimes it does come back that there's not enough right-of-way or the land belongs to a private entity that it would make it somewhat cost prohibitive to put any type of structure there. And here's, again, some more challenges where that we see out in the field every day. And these are all over the city where Herb staff goes out and sees these things throughout the city. Another item we wanted to bring up is something that happens on some of the north-south routes in Council District 1 especially, where we have areas where years ago the residential development was built, so it's where you have this residential street. Say if you're going northbound, and Councilwoman Williams knows these well, and we've put these stops in these areas to provide service, but in some areas it's a very small median that again would prohibit us from putting in anything larger that we would like. Luckily over the past year, Herb, we've addressed some of these where we can do something, but there are going to be a few instances where the right-of-way is not wide enough where we would be able to put in something like we would like, a landing pad, a bus pullout, things like that, so that we're not also obstructing traffic.
Is there a standard that you must meet to site those bus stops?
Herb, can you shed some light on that?
Madam Chair, members of the council, please ask the question again.
Is there a standard that we have to
Yeah.
use when we're
I mean, do
placing
they
these out
have
there?
to be exactly half mile or, I mean,
We use federal guidelines for spacing, and the mile marks, then we drop down to half-mile marks, quarter-mile marks, and sometimes as close as 8-mile marks.
do what?
8 mile.
8
One
miles?
Up down to 1/8 of a
Oh,
mile.
1/8. I was like,
Correct.
8 mile, that's
And,
pretty good.
and within there's ranges that we follow inside, but in these areas here that you see, these were long stretches that back before we started really enforcing ADA guidelines, they went and placed it per the federal guidelines, the quarter mile spacings.
So what we see generally throughout the region and what we see in similar size agencies, the quarter mile placement is what we see most often. And that's what you see in Phoenix, is that along any given route, you should see a bus stop approximately every quarter mile. In more dense areas, like Herb says, it might be 1/8 of a mile. And so this is an example of something that we'll do moving forward down in District 8, 35th Avenue and Baseline, where we were able to identify the right-of-way, put down some connectivity in terms of sidewalk and infrastructure, and then we go ahead and we look at the ridership analysis and we make sure that this is a spot that needs it, which in this case it did, and now we have a nice infrastructure there that will last us a very long time. And it is being used. We've confirmed that ever since we put it in. So you saw this chart at the beginning of our presentation, but what we wanted to do was correlate it in terms of ridership. So the first half is bus stops. So currently 77% of our bus stops are shaded. However, when we correlate that with geocoded stamped boardings, you can see, again, the top 2 rows, even though 77% of our stops are shaded, we're hitting 93% of our ridership, which we feel is really good. So we have, over the years, appropriately and judiciously placed these stops at areas where we know people are boarding. We are going to be working on that other 7% in the years to come, but right now we're hitting 93%. So we are certainly hitting the highest number of boardings where we have put these stops. And again, it's at major intersections. We do provide some routes that service high schools, routes that provide connectivity to light rail. That's where you see the majority of these structures and shade structures. And this is just the same information provided in a graphical data type. And so the next steps in terms of wrapping up this study, what we will do is that we'll rank the projects by need. In other words, where do we see people boarding and where do we need those stops placed? We plan to do 30 bus stops per year, and we do that now. Again, Joe and Herb's group working very close together in terms of matching the structure needs to the ridership needs. And then we'll continue to monitor opportunities with redevelopment projects and streets. Well, we work very closely with the private community. Anytime a warehouse or anything like that's going in with Mr. Dovalina's group, when a development of any sort is coming in, if we can put this in from the get-go, then that helps everyone and that saves us some money long-term. And that was it, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I get a lot of comments about this particular issue, and I shared with them that we put shade stops in at the stops based on usage patterns, and they said, well, I drive my children to somewhere with shade because the ones near my house don't have shade.
Right.
So that your data is not based on what would be optimum, but that the parents, is there any way to take that into account?
Absolutely. We actually do, in addition to the two methods that we did earlier, that I mentioned earlier, the fare collection system and the automatic passenger counters, we actually have staff through one of our contracts that goes out occasionally and looks at situations exactly like that to confirm that the numbers that our vehicles recording reflect what's happening on the street. But if there's ever any specific areas like that that you want to bring to our attention, absolutely, we can look at them. Because we do it based on every transaction that's being recorded on the bus, and that's every person coming in the front of the bus.
But the parents were saying they're choosing a stop with shade, and so it
Yeah.
skews the data set.
Okay.
That there would be boardings
I see.
at a higher level at a stop that currently doesn't have shade.
Okay. Yeah, and if we're made aware of those, we can certainly evaluate them for placement.
Do
Certainly.
we use everyone in the county, we have that air quality survey about would you want to take buses and where are your cross streets? Can we use some of that data to understand where people are who
We
want to take the
currently
bus?
do. Joe, do you know if we can speak to that?
So generally, we're going to put shaded bus stops at all the major intersections, which would be transfer points to connect to routes, or Cesar Chavez High School, Betty Fairfax, that type, where we know we have clustered uses of riders. And, we continue to look at the data that's available in the Maricopa County, their users survey, vehicle user. And so when we're made aware of particular areas, we do respond to that. Herb's group's very good at making the efforts to get structures there. But I would add that our proposed tax initiative, one of the main items that the public requested and that the committee put in the plan was to shade all bus stops. As Jesus pointed out, we have some where there's right-of-way or no curb sidewalk issues, but those would come with time as those areas are developed. But so shaded bus stops are really a very high priority for us. But we, when people call in, whether it comes through the council districts or we get it through our customer service line, we take every step to look at that situation and see what we can do to remedy that. So the people in your district that, if they can get a hold of us or through you, you can tell us what stop they're the closest to, then we can react to that.
Right, because we do, some of those calls are in an area of the district where I
Sure.
think right-of-way is
Correct.
available. For when right-of-way is not available, is it possible to build a different type of structure that provides shade but no seating? And
That's
I'm
my
glad
question.
you asked that. That was my question.
That's my
the
question.
council is unified behind.
That's a great question, and actually, one of the things that we've all been looking at, because we get the industry publications, is a new type of infrastructure that would provide shade. And one of the things, Herb can talk a little bit about this, are some of the vertical panels that we're seeing, and we've done that at some of the parking rides. And some of the industry manufacturers have been coming out with those type of things. And that's similar to what light rail did. Instead of putting canopies out, they did canopies up. And so that's something that we're starting to look at, but that's relatively new to our industry. Herb, do we shed a little more light on that?
It's basically that, and we've done a little bit of research, and some design firms have done some studies that show that people will use vertical structures for shade versus overhang. And so right now, that's what we're looking at, placing vertical structures where we have the room, because we try not to block the ADA portion of pads, accessibility areas, so vertical structures would probably help us out in those areas.
And so that's what we try to do is balance infrastructure versus sidewalk access. And then we also see what type of ridership is at that particular juncture so that we can evaluate what else is needed there. Is it a shade structure? Is it a bench in addition to it? Is it a stop where someone in a wheelchair can wait there for a long time? Do we also add a trash can? We evaluate that all firsthand, literally.
I think ASU has some grants to help cities with sustainability where they could look at design challenges. So if that's one resource we could consider.
Okay, thank you.
This seems like a good student project.
It does.
One of our entrepreneurs,
One of-
or
yeah.
innovative
Mhm.
young or businesses out there. Can you go back to a picture? Say, keep going. Yeah. Where was it? This one. Even though obviously that's not an ADA compliance or anything like that, but there's still some room there to put some type of shading. And what it is, I don't know. How long it'll last, I don't know. But like some type of temporary shading would be nice in those areas, especially, I'm assuming that's over in the southwest corner of District 7 or 8 or southeast, but it's in District 7 or 8 around in that area. Could be also be in Maryville too, but is there any way or industry have anything to get some temporary shading in there?
What we try to balance is the shading and the ADA accessibility, because what the ADA basically says is if you're going to improve anything, it has to be full blown. We can't only do partial. And then the issue that we also have to balance is we wouldn't just put a pad out there by itself. ADA says that you have to provide connectivity. So in other words, once your concrete pad is down, you have to connect to somewhere else like a sidewalk.
So I'm like even going less than that.
Right.
I'm not even going to put a pad or anything like,
would just want a shade
I just
structure.
want
An umbrella.
an umbrella, something, canopy, at least for temporary, to provide shade.
Right, and we would love to do that, but when we improve something, it has to be basically
be all that.
full-blown with connectivity.
Okay.
Right, so that's where we have to balance these things.
I'm thinking, I think it's 28th Avenue and Greenway. It is on 28th Avenue. It's on the east side. The bus stop is a very narrow sidewalk with a fence abutting it. Across the street on 28th Avenue is a large church with nice sidewalks and room. Why couldn't it just be moved to the other side of the street? Is there a reason it has to be on that side of the street?
We can look at that. It might be connectivity for electricity or something like that. We can certainly take a look at it and get an answer.
Because every morning on my way to come in here, there's always a group of people, and it's,
What may have
and
happened.
it looks dangerous, quite frankly.
What may have happened is the bus stop may have gone in before the church made their improvements, and, there was never any coordination relative to moving anything, but we can certainly take a look at it and see what we
I
can do.
would not be surprised if that were the answer, but it just seems like there's got to be a better solution than having those people 6 inches from traffic barreling by them. So-
Right, and we try to place them again where we see a lot of ridership, but again, where we can balance the two, passenger access and mobility aid access. So we'll take a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very
I'm sure
much.
that's not the only situation like that in town. Any further questions?
I know this is the analysis. Who does the maintenance of the shade?
Herb, you want to talk a little bit? It's a contractor, but Herb can talk a little bit about how we go about that.
Madam Chair, members of subcommittee, we have a contract that goes out, a contractor that manages our bus stops, a cleaning and minor repair
Okay,
to the 4,000 bus stops.
I need to get to you.
Our subcontractor.
And according to the ridership that we've recorded, we do have some that are cleaned 5 times a week, 3 times a week, twice a week, and so on and so forth. But if there's any spots that you want us to take a look at, we can look at.
there's a bus stop on 7th Avenue in Indian School that has the awning and everything, but no canopy, or I don't know what the top is, but there's no shade. Has the structures and fixtures, but
Yeah, currently there's quite a few older shelters that have lost their roofs because of monsoon, and they're just deteriorating, so we're in the process of replacing
okay,
those.
good.
And that's one of the locations.
Oh, good.
I understand
Know them well.
Councilman Gates has joined us.
I have, yes, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question. Have we had any examples where we've done public-private partnerships on these shades, or if we haven't, are there any limitations on us looking at that possibility?
Madam Chair, Councilman Gates, I know a few years ago, we looked into that where we looked into some sponsorship type of opportunities with the private sector, and unfortunately, the interest was just not there. We did look at that either in specific areas or on a citywide basis. We left several options open, and my recollection is that the interest to do those type of things, to sponsor a bus stop, the interest was just not there, unfortunately. So what we do now is we do the advertising revenue contracts where we have one for bus wraps and advertisements on buses, and we have a separate one for bus stops themselves. And what we're going to be doing probably in the next year or two is we're going to see if we can combine those two, so we can get more bang for our buck in terms of perhaps having one contractor do both. And we'll look at the results of that after we do a procurement on that.
Do you have any further questions?
So, and I'm just wondering, is the thinking that you might look at whether there's any interest in folks support, maybe it's the advertisers or others, supporting with the construction of additional shades that could then have shade structures that could then have advertising on them?
Yes, what we do now is we work with our advertising contractor, and they've actually recently come to us with one or two new types of stops that they want to do. And we're going to do most likely a pilot project in the next year or so where it's I'll call it a more robust type of advertisement placement. But we want to test it first to see how it holds up in the weather and with the public's use. But that is certainly something that we'll evaluate once we do that pilot.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now go back to item 3, stormwater use. It's Councilman Gates is on phone, and I know this is an item that was very important to him. I understand Mark Hartman is out of the city today or unavailable, so Ellen, I think you get to take the lead.
I thought I was at planning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Have with me Ray Dovalina from the Street Transportation Department and Brandy Kelso from the Water Services Department and Joe Dugais from the Office of Environmental Programs. And so we had been working with Mr. Hartman on the stormwater use issue, which I believe is a result of some discussions that Councilman Gates had brought up about what the city does with stormwater and what our requirements are once it falls on property. And so we'll kind of go through a few things here this afternoon, and then we've got a lot more work to do, and we'll come back with in the future with some other items for you. But from the standpoint of how it works within the city, my department's Planning Development Department manages the on-site maintenance and the on-site requirements, I should say, not really maintenance, for private development. And then Street Transportation Department does the regional maintenance, regional management issues. And then the Water Department has responsibility for water quality and what happens afterwards with that. So from the Planning and Development Department's perspective, our development standard is that we retain water on site for a 2-hour, 100-year storm event. So these are what you see in terms of the common retention basins within development throughout the city of Phoenix. You note in these pictures here that this looks a far cry from some of the developments in the 70s and early 80s where it was mostly concrete and gunite, and that's how we maintain things. And so we have a much more environmentally friendly and much more better appearance. But with that comes some on-site maintenance requirements. And so Those are things that have one of the concerns related to some on-site challenges we may have for any type of green infrastructure or cisterns, other ways to keep the water on site. With that, I'll turn it over to Ray, who's going to go through the next couple of slides.
Thank you, Alan. So as Alan mentioned, he's working towards only with regards to the on-site retention or the on-site drainage. We have to deal with street transportation, all the off-site drainage, as well as the transportation systems that we have. So we have numerous locations where we work with the flood control district, Maricopa County, and so we deal with the regional aspect of the off-site drainage. So these are some examples of what we've done. Some of them are, for the most part, are maintained by the city of Phoenix, but there are some other ones that are maintained by potentially homeowners associations. So there's combinations of off-site drainage maintenance and operations of those systems. With regards to these types of systems, there's a hardscape, there's all these different types of items that help slow down water flows, retain it, meter it out into a system that eventually goes into some of the major washes that we have across the city. Here's an example of another large-scale drainage systems that we have. For example, the Levine Conveyance Channel is one that provides water drainage onto a system that eventually drains into the Salt River. Another one would be the Bethany Home Outfall Channel. So all of these just collect the drainage and then meter it out to a large wash, such as like the Agua Fria or the Salt River. So I'm trying to remember which one I have to go into in the next one here. So Brandy Kelso will go into the next couple of slides.
All right, thank you, Ray. So once the water kind of gets to where it needs to go through the infrastructure, the water department watches the water quality, and a lot of that is dictated by a federal permit called the MS4. And so there are certain things we can and can't do with the water related to that. And the biggest thing is water quality. And as you can imagine, as the water flows across streets and other structures, it picks up things along the way: gas, oils, pesticides, fertilizers, and et cetera. And so while that's okay to naturally discharge it, because that's what the discharge channels are made for, once we try to collect that and treat that, we have to treat it to a much higher standard. So if we were to do something that we had to collect large amounts of stormwater, there would be treatment required and a lot more infrastructure than what Ray is already maintaining and using. In addition, stormwater across the whole state does have water rights associated with it. We are in that a lot of times as the water department, knowing that we are getting upstream water rights from storm that go off across the watershed. Well, there are people that consider Phoenix as part of their watershed because it goes into the Salt River, as Ray mentioned, and goes downstream, and they have rights to those. And then I think it's back to you, Alan.
It is. So on this next slide, really what we're talking about here is that there's a lot of policy guidance and things that have been adopted by the city or in the process of being adopted, like our general plan, our transit district plans, that talk about using some different types of green infrastructure methods to retain water on site so that it doesn't flow downstream as much as it has in the past. However, in order to really evaluate some of those things, staff needs some more time to ensure that we address issues like Brandy raised related to water rights downstream, what would happen on those on a large scale. And then staff within my department and Ray's department have some concerns about maintenance challenges and items associated with that. We have existing requirements, like, for example, within our green building code that allow people to propose and do things on site, but they're not requirements. And so to go into making them requirements and strengthening some of those, we'll have to do a little bit further analysis and study. particularly related to our storm events. Some of the things that you all have had the experience of dealing with over the last year or so, and as well as our constituents, have been a lot of the flooding issues that we've had. And so as part of some of those flooding issues, a lack of maintenance is one of the issues that's been identified in terms of people HOAs not maintaining some of their on-site open space and retention areas. And so some of these newer green infrastructure techniques do have some of those same maintenance challenges and concerns. So, right now, staff is proposing that we'd work to develop an HOA notice responsibility for maintenance practices. So we would do a kind of annual review with them, talk about what needs to be done so that they can maintain those facilities, and where they may even need to hire, an outside engineer to help them to make sure that they are maintaining those facilities, and what could be done related to any options that they may want to pursue regarding green infrastructure. We can also work through my department to develop some regulations. If people wanted to construct a cistern or do something like that as an option, they would be able to do that, but it wouldn't be mandatory. And then we continue our work with the Complete Streets Advisory Board and through Ray and the Street Transportation Department related to the Complete Streets policy and their design manual to look at where some of those existing infrastructure items may be put in place in terms of retrofit, and what make sense from a perspective of maintenance and ensuring that it doesn't cause any downstream impacts with any flooding or anything else. And then we'll also work through my department and our various stakeholder groups to evaluate some other green infrastructure items that might be used on private properties to retain water on there. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Alan, do you have a catalog or listing of all the plans you've approved that homeowners associations were to maintain their retention bases or whatever was in their plan to control the water?
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we do have as part of their plats, or if they're in a PCD and they have approved master plans, it talks about who is the responsible party in that and names the HOA. In all of our recent ones, that is not disputed. There's old ones, as you've heard in the past, related to private streets and other things that probably weren't as clear, so we'll have to work through some of those. But really what we're trying to get at is an educational campaign, because we think a lot of HOAs don't really understand that a lot of those infrastructure items are theirs to maintain, and they think that, oh, that's just a pretty little wash running over there. And really, when it goes under the road and there is a head wall and a pipe that goes through there, that's theirs to maintain, and they need to make sure that that's cleaned out and do those things. So it's really an educational campaign that we do have a fairly good access to create that list, but we don't have it, ready that I can just whip out and we'll be able to do tomorrow, but we are going to put it together.
Because I know last year we worked with a couple of those HOAs who, the original owners of the property, I'm sure, were quite aware of it, but over the years, 20 years ago, have all new homeowners, new people on the HOA who haven't any idea what the original agreement was and had not saved their money, not done maintenance, and really come back and wanted the city to take care of it right now. And quite frankly, it's not our responsibility. So I'm very pleased to hear you talk about notifying them, letting them know that they do have that responsibility, because I can just drive up and down some of the streets and look at them and know there's going to be a problem, because it is slowly, the sediment has built up and they're no longer really basins. Or you can see where the pipes went through and now the sediment or rocks or whatever has built up and totally changed the flow of water. And I don't think it's going to decrease. I think as time goes by, the problem is going to increase. So however we can notify, help them understand what their responsibility, their role is, the sooner the better. So that's just my comment. Councilman Gates, this was an item you asked to be brought forth. Do you have questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for putting this item on the agenda. It's an important item, and when we went through the floods of last year, I got asked this question by a lot of people. Well, are we capturing this water in some way? Is there kind of the silver lining to since we live in a desert, that we can at least be capturing this water. So first of all, I appreciate the insights we've got here today and some of the limitations we have on capturing the water, given either water agreements that have existed for many years or, like Brandy commented on, the additional treating, the higher level of treatment that would have to occur on this water. But, having said all of that, I agree with you that it's important that we help educate the HOAs. I have a lot of them in my district as well that are right along the preserve. So we've had some significant flooding issues, not like in District 8, but also significant and lots of questions raised about who's responsible. And I appreciate what Alan's saying as well, that as far as looking at property owners who would like to create, to put infrastructure in place on their own property that would lead to rainwater capture, that we do that in we kind of go with the carrot approach as opposed to the stick approach. I'm not supportive of mandating that on people, but if we can encourage that and put things in our code that would encourage doing that on people's property, it's sustainable and certainly makes sense living in a desert like we do. So thank you for the presentation on this, and look forward to further fleshing out of this in the months ahead.
Thank you. We do have one card. Do you want to hear the card? Ryan Wood? Yeah. Here we go.
Thank you very much. My name is Ryan Wood. I work for a nonprofit organization, Watershed Management Group. And part of our mission is to teach people how to take advantage of the resources they have with their rainwater and their stormwater, and how to use that on their private property. And through Watershed Management Group, we'd be very happy to work with the city staff on helping to promote that and help to educate the public on how to correctly take advantage of this resource that falls on their property. And I just wanted to mention that my support on the recommendations that the staff has given to the council and subcommittee. And if there's anything that Watershed Management can do to help, we're here to provide that support.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming down today.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes.
Councilwoman?
I represent an area where some people are going to be rebuilding basins, and they had asked if there were resources to help them do it in a more environmentally friendly way. Am I looking at resources?
You are, yes. We are a resource here.
And it could be that micro? I mean, this is like an HOA with a little basin.
Yes.
Okay.
We do projects at a residential level, and then also we have projects where I was happy to see one of our demonstration sites, with the photos in the past slide, down at First Street and Grant in front of the Primera Iglesias Methodist Church. That was the first project that was approved to put cores into the curb and create those, we call them, they'd be a bioretention basin. And the theory behind that is to be able to capture that stormwater in these micro basins as it's going down, so that way we can help treat the pollution at micro levels, so there's not as much pollution that goes into the outfalls. And by teaming that up with the correct, using organic material and organic ground cover, the shrubs, trees help take up that pollution and clean that stormwater. And it's really important that these type of sites are maintained correctly, going on to the first topic of the day. So when thinking about how to maintain a green infrastructure site, it's a little bit different than just a normal site, because of it's important to have these type of materials in place, so that way the stormwater can be best treated on site. And we provide for anyone, it's free to be what we call a co-op member. And it's free to come out to these co-op workshops where we're installing these type of water harvesting systems, creating those shallow basins to slow and spread and sink the rainwater, installing the rain tanks to be able to capture water to help mitigate the stormwater, but always planning that overflow when the water fills up into the tank, it needs somewhere to go. And that's what we do through our nonprofit organization. So,
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Council Member and Subcommittee.
I have this is a question that I guess I could ask in a couple of the agenda items today. One of the things we learned during the storm system is that the city was ordering water, and so the water was in canal systems during rain events. And I have been looking for opportunities, so Parks Department had orders, but I assume we have orders related to water treatment plants. How could we talk about that coordination and?
Sure. Councilwoman Gallegos and members of the committee, we order water based on what we think the demands are going to be. Through the SRP system, we actually have to place our order a day in advance. And so we are always watching the weather, and when we think there's going to be rain, we do pull back what we're planning to order that day. We use past experience for that. We also look at how much water we already have in the system as far as reservoir levels and that kind of stuff. I think in talking with SRP, it was less the water department, because for us, it's really take the water in and put it out to the customers that are using it at their homes. It's more those like parks and agricultural customers that are putting it on the ground. They have nowhere to put it anymore once it starts raining. But all those orders are placed a day in advance, and I know for us, we do a lot of work and watching the weather and when is it going to rain and where are our reservoir levels currently to help mitigate that as much as we can.
How does coordination between the water department and emergency management work?
Very well. We have people on our team that are part of the emergency management team, and so we're in those common meetings and coordination. Catherine and our other assistant directors have direct links into those. And when there is an emergency ops call, we have people there as well to be able to correspond with what's happening with the water department.
Thank you.
Anything else? Councilman Gates, do you have anything further?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for the presentation. We will go to item 6. Ellen, I believe this one is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. This item is, well, we'll be coming up here in just a second. I don't think we need any action. I mean, you guys are okay on the last item with the, you didn't make a formal recommendation, but I think you're okay with, no, I think you're okay with the, I mean, it was direction generally to have us pursue the HOA notice as well as the complete streets item. But I assumed it was safe, so I wasn't making an issue of it. Okay, so moving on to this next item here. This is your infill development update and utility coordination update. And so for this item, we have Cindy Stotler and also Brandy Kelso from the Water Department again here. And so real quick, I won't bore you with some of these slides, but for our viewers who may have tuned in, you as council members are all very aware of our Urban Phoenix and what we're trying to do related to promoting infill development and along the light rail line. We've been very successful, and a number of projects you see happening throughout the city are really the fruits of a number of labor by various departments throughout the last several years to make things happen in this arena. We do have an infill development goal, and that's on the screen here, and it really focuses on the light rail line and the areas surrounding that that have some existing public infrastructure. So trying to promote growth and development there in addition to our suburban, more traditional areas. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy, who's going to talk from here for a couple of slides, and then over to Brandy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. So overwhelmingly, the feedback from the public during the Plan Phoenix and the Reinvent Phoenix workshops that we put on are, we want more walkability and shade, especially in the downtown area and along the light rail where we want to walk from rail stop to rail stop. So the challenge for staff and the goal we set for ourselves was to find some solutions and some options for developers to create this walkability, the shade structures that are required in the code when we have conflicts with public utilities, water and sewer lines, dry utilities, How do we make that happen? How do we help developers solve that and get the public what they want, which is shade trees and shade structures? So I have been working very closely with a public utility coordination committee that we meet every month. It includes dry utilities, includes water department, and we've been working on options that I will share with you today, some of the options that we've developed. And then Brandy has been working in the water department with a consultant to evaluate tree clearance requirements from water lines to see what we can do about that. So a little bit of why we're here today. The walkable urban code in the draft form that's out, I think it was out a couple days ago, requires 75% shade of public sidewalks when you're developing in the right-of-way. So all of the right-of-way frontage of your new development within the walkable urban code, which is along all the transit lines, has to have shade and has to have 75% shade over the sidewalks. To get to 75% shade, you pretty much have to have shade on both sides of the sidewalk. So in the past, that's been very difficult to have both trees on both sides of the sidewalk or awnings or anything off a building, because you usually somewhere in there you've got right-of-way and you've got a public utility easement, which doesn't allow the structures that you need in there, or it doesn't give you the distance that you need or the height that you need or something like that. So it's been overwhelmingly difficult in the past to develop this way and give you that shade. Our experience with the downtown code was very telling with this. It revealed that most of the design professionals in Phoenix and the Valley, they're not used to designing for urban development, which we know, and it's not a surprise. But what they typically do is get the client in, maybe it's a big, multifamily development. They get the client in, they start developing the way they usually do. So they maximize the parcel for a building environment, and then they come in and talk to us in the pre-application meeting, and that's when we tell them, oh no, here's all the requirements for shade and the public utility easements along the edge of your property when you're replatting. And then they're going backwards. So they're kind of already down the road by the time they get to us, and they have to backtrack and figure out how to make this shade happen. So what was resulting from that was lots of variances for reduced shade requirements, because they were already down that road. They already kind of had their funding in place, with their plans in place. So what we're trying to do with the walkable urban code is learn from that experience and provide options up front to developers. So when they're thinking about developing this parcel that's in the new walkable urban code area, they can go and get some of the exhibits that I'm going to show you and start planning that way. Start planning for the public utilities, start planning for the shade, and then figure out what I have left to develop the building. And do I need to go higher or denser, and go that way, so we're not all the way down the road and coming back with variances. So that's our goal here. So I'll share with you a couple of the options we've come up with. This is a major arterial road. We're furthest along in the WU code in the Gateway Transit area, which is between the 51 and 44th Street along the light rail on Washington and Jefferson. So this is, for example, Washington is a major arterial. We have 50 feet of right-of-way, which you can see on the bottom line, 32 feet of pavement. What we've done here is show an example of where we have a tree on one side and a building shade awning on the other, and we have found a way to incorporate or consolidate the public utility easement with the sidewalk easement, and starting the property line at the beginning of the public utility easement, but the setback starts at the back of the public utility easement. So it's very complicated, but what we're trying to do is not, require everybody to be an expert in all of the city code requirements, as well as the WU code requirements, walkable urban code, but give them examples to show them this is how you could do it. We are the experts in it, so here's how we can show you how to make this happen. So that's one example. Another example, option B, this is again something like Washington with a transit line in it. But if, in the case of going out towards the airport, you've got a lot of open area. You might have developments that have a lot more space on their parcels, and they might want to set back. So we could have the double trees to get the shade requirements you need over the sidewalk, and then also further back they can activate the frontage of their buildings with outdoor seating and things like that. So we have a lot of options if you have the space to provide this nice walkable environment, and also street activation that we're looking for in the urban code. Another option is an arterial such as something like Van Buren, where we have no transit line in it. So it's our major arterial, but it's not got a transit line in it, and we are not looking at 50 feet of right-of-way anymore for that. So the option here is to talk to the city and look at, do we really need 50 feet of right-of-way? If we're looking at something like Van Buren, where our goal eventually is a street diet, we're looking at complete streets. We're going to look at reducing the amount of pavement and putting in street parking, putting in parklets, things like that we're looking at, bikeways. and stuff like that. So in that case, we would probably we would be able to work with the developer, reduce the right-of-way dedication and give them some options for putting landscape in, as well as, this is an arcade gallery option where they put the whole sidewalk under the arcade. So they actually have almost 100% shade in this option. And that's another one of the frontages that's offered in the walkable urban code. So what we're trying to do is show you a whole bunch of different ways that this can happen depending on the circumstances of the lot and depending on the builder and developer, what they elect to do. But all of the options that I'm showing you, I do want to make clear that we developed options that don't require any variances from the zoning ordinance or any technical appeals from city code. So these all can be done without variances or technical appeals. You may have to get an encroachment permit if you are encroaching with a shade structure in the right-of-way, but we're going to try to facilitate that. We're working with streets to try to facilitate that process and make it fast and easy for developers to go along with the walkable urban code development they're doing. Another aerial option, I'm not going to go over every one of these in detail, but this is just another outdoor activation option where it starts at the back of the public utility easement and you have the double trees transit line, and this is a full 50 feet of right-of-way. And then last, there's a local collector option if you have a smaller street. It's not a major arterial. You're not going to have as much room in there. We don't have as many options of providing shade in those as we do with the major arterials and all the space. So you're probably looking at a tree on one side and you're going to have to incorporate the building as part of your shade on the other side with an awning that overhangs, as I said, into the public utility easement. So when you have an awning that overhangs in the public utility easement, you have to go 16 feet at least at a minimum, and you can only go 20 feet max per the walkable urban code. So you have that couple of feet of leeway there depending on how high your building is and where you're coming off of it. But we found workable ways. We believe that this will provide the 75% shade.
Sandy,
Yes.
on those, are you actually moving the building, if it's a new building, back on the property?
So
For that extra?
we have some flexibility in the code. We can start, if you have a public utility easement, which we recognize if you're going to replat to create, one parcel out of many, you're going to have a mandatory public utility easement. So recognizing that, we've given the developer the option of creating their setback at the end of the public utility easement.
Right.
So they have their 12 or 10 feet, whatever district they're in, they can start there. So some of these buildings are going back further. So some of our solutions for that are to combine the public utility easement with the sidewalk easement and double use that space so that they can bring the building up closer to the road like we want and then still provide the shade over the sidewalk.
If they're setting back, does that diminish their parking?
It could. It just depends on the design of the development. I mean, a lot of them are doing parking garages in the downtown area and along closer to the downtown on the light rail. Further out, they're not doing as many parking garages. So it will, and that's why we're trying to find these combinations of space, because they do want to maximize the lot for development and parking. So we're trying to help them do that by helping them combine some of these requirements and still meet all the requirements of the code.
You have questions? Is that the end of the presentation?
That's the end of my presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Brandy now. So Brandy's going to talk about tree clearance requirements.
Oh, this is my favorite.
It's my favorite too. Thank you, Cindy. So one of the things that's come up through this and looking at these different designs is the water department currently has a 10-foot standard separation between the water and sewer lines and trees, such that we don't want the tree roots to get into the water and sewer lines, causing backage of sewer or a water main break and those type of things. So we've actually hired a landscape architect to kind of help walk us through this and look at a variety of things. And one of the first things we looked at is what are other cities doing? We wanted to look at a variety, and we've just listed a few of the ones here that we've contacted. We've contacted several others. We haven't necessarily always gotten back all the information we needed. But you can see it really does vary quite a bit, anywhere from down to 5 feet up to 20 feet. And I think the last time we were here talking about this issue, I had mentioned there was a city that had a 20-foot clearance, and that actually is Tempe, which kind of surprises me because it seems like they have a lot of trees and they're very walkable and very bike friendly and things like that. And then we were really surprised at the Tucson one that had actually tied it to the height that the maturity of the tree depended on the distance from the utility. So just kind of a variety of different ways that other utilities are looking at this. I wanted to give you some examples of what it looks like when these roots get into our infrastructure. The picture on your upper right, I think that is actually a sewer line that we found where the tree root came and grew into the pipe. It actually can get strong enough to break through the pipe and grows in it. And then it kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the other stuff that's coming down the sewer pipe clogs it all up and can back up the sewer. And this is the exact thing that we're trying to get rid of because it's not good for our infrastructure, and it's actually not good for the tree. A lot of times when the tree roots do grow into our pipe, we actually have to take down the tree as well as fix the infrastructure. So our consultant looked at the variety of things that they had from other utilities. We talked a lot about pipe types that we use, the type of materials we use. We looked at the existing tree lists, and they've made a couple recommendations. The first recommendation is to citywide maintain the 10-foot separation. But in these areas where the WU code is going to be applicable and in the infill redevelopment district, they're suggesting a 6-foot separation with mitigation. And so those mitigations, there's a list of them there for you. One would be recommended trees. So trees that only grow to about a canopy of 12 feet, because that 6 foot, most trees won't grow, their root structure won't grow further than the canopy. And so that keeps the root structure out of our infrastructure if we're 6 feet, and it's not going to grow more than 6 feet. However, there are some trees that even when you get rid of the tree, the roots will continue to grow. So we definitely don't want that on the recommended tree list with this mitigation. Some of the other things we're talking about are root barriers, which are very common, where you actually, out from the tree, you put in a barrier, and it's different types of materials that you can use for this, such that when the root comes in contact with that, it won't continue to grow in that direction. It will kind of grow in other directions away from the infrastructure. And then we've got a couple of other things that the consultant has recommended that we can use to not only protect the tree, but also our infrastructure. So it's a win-win for both, and would allow us to move those trees closer to our infrastructure. So I believe our recommendations today are to update our design standards manual for the water department to include the 6 feet with mitigation. Our consultant has been working on some graphics and some technical language to put in specifications and those type of things. We expect to have that done by June, and actually are starting to use that now. If there were development coming in as we're working through that, we would work with those developments to allow that to happen. And then I think Cindy is working with the Walkable Urban Code to have that in summer of 2015, and the draft's out now. And then to adopt the MAT adoption in early 2016, which...
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, in terms of the Walkable WU Code, it's really a two-part adoption process. So the first part that we list is summer of 2015, and that is actually putting the text in the ordinance. And by putting it in the ordinance, we will then allow developers who wish to come in and develop their properties, they can rezone to that particular zoning district as opposed to picking a C2 with a high-rise development or something like that and trying to rezone into that. We would say you're doing your own case, rezone into the Walkable Urban Code, here's your requirements for that. And that's the quickest way to get it on projects that are ready to develop today. What we have as a follow-up item after our reInvent grant time period is over is to continue to work on changing existing zoning entitlements so that we can replace the TOD1 and TOD2 zoning overlays that are there with the Walkable Urban Code that would be consistent with the transit district plans. And so because that process, we have to notify all the individual property owners who were changing their zoning, but also the property owners and neighborhood associations who are in proximity to where we're changing it. That's a much more involved public process, and we'll have a lot more dialogue with them, so that'll take more time, and that's why we show that going into 2016.
When you bring these back, are you bringing them back to this subcommittee, or are the standards as shown today?
So we can do it either way. I think part of what we're hoping to get is direction from how the subcommittee would like us to proceed. We will be coming back on the walkable urban code, so you're going to have that item on, and so those exhibits that Cindy showed will come forward as part of that discussion, because that's how we're going to tie back in what they can do to the plan. And if you guys are okay with the water services information that Brandy presented, they will just go and update the design manual based upon what was just presented to you.
Okay.
And we don't need to come back, but if you want us to come back, we certainly can.
Okay. Do you have questions? Questions?
So I do. I guess first off, how does this dovetail with the work that Public Works is doing and their other shade efforts?
So both Brandy and I are members of that other task force that Public Works is doing. And so one of the things that Brandy spoke about at the last meeting was this study. She didn't present as much information, but we did share with that committee that we were working on this, and it would allow the same 6-foot recommendation, and that's what we're hoping to get subcommittee input on today. So it dovetails very nicely, because one of the other items that we're talking about within that group is in this area that really comes down to the infill development area and areas in proximity to that, where trees are of utmost importance, to have some special regulations and maybe pilot some things within that area, whether that's a public works requirement related to how they trim trees, or whether it's how the water department treats the utility corridors, or how we have regulations over private property. Certainly within our infill boundaries, walking and trees are critical. And so we want to make sure that we have it kind of tied to that map, so that we can build all those things together and make sure that what Public Works is bringing forward will probably have some relationship to those boundaries as well.
Councilman Gates, do you have any questions?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Not really a question, but I guess more of a comment. And I've made this in other instances where this infill development is limited to just along the light rail. I think there are other parts of the city, and in particular Sunny Slope, where these type of applying it and adding it to the infill area makes a lot of sense. So again, I guess I would just kind of reiterate that, and a lot of the reasons that you would want these types of things to occur within the infill development area, I think you'd also want within Sunny Slope.
Okay, thank you. I do have
a few more questions, but we can go first.
Well, my question is how are you timing this? Because I know that Streets Department is also looking at complete streets construction and planning, and it just seems like you wouldn't want to do yours and then turn around and do that. There should be some type of coordination so that it's all done at one time to reduce the cost not only for the developer but for the city.
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we are working with the Street Transportation Department on the complete street effort as well. It is something that, you're right, we have to closely work on, but because the walkable urban code is moving forward and it's going to regulate private property, the complete streets effort is really focused on the public right-of-way and what's happening in that. There is going to be some overlap, and we may have to go back in the future after we're much further along with complete streets and we figure out what they're going to do to amend some of our requirements to have a little bit better interface from the private property requirements and the public right-of-way requirements. But if we were to hold up today and wait for that effort, we would miss out on some of the new development that's happening and some of the things that we want to see. And so we would recommend moving forward with this, but with the recognition that we do need to monitor that and may have to make some changes.
I guess my concern is before you're moving forward with this, that you have dialogue with the streets and have some idea of what the complete streets program will look like, and that's incorporated to whatever you do.
So, Madam Chairman, as a member of the subcommittee, there isn't anything that we're proposing out of this that isn't something that they all align with a complete street package. So the regulations that are coming forward from the Walkable Urban Code are promoting standards on private property that are complementary to a complete street. The shortening of the utility corridors are also complementary to a complete street because it's allowing us to put in the trees to have that walkable environment associated with that. And Ms. Stotler's a member of the Complete Streets group from my department, and so she's made presentations, about it on the walkable code, and is working as part of that group to make sure that we are closely aligned with those requirements.
So we get to hold Cindy accountable.
Yes.
Just kidding.
So there is dialogue that's
Okay.
happening between everything that's
Yes.
happening. That's moving.
So one of the, I think, reasons we are having this now is some of the conversations we started having around Van Buren and the desire to have a more green Van Buren, which some private sector developers had approached us with, and is very consistent with what the community has been asking. And so the sewer lines on Van Buren are in the curb area.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, my timing couldn't have been worse.
That's fine. I actually don't know exactly where they're at. I have heard they're fairly close to the curb, especially when you start to bring the curbs in, as we've been talking about.
So I guess I'm concerned that this is not going to allow the kind of development that we'd hoped it would, and especially, I mean, some of these mitigation measures are not cheap, and so if the city were to do a large project at scale under this, I mean, we're not going to do a large project at scale under this is my concern, given budget realities and.
So
Go ahead.
one of, you saw one of my exhibits was a street like Van Buren. I even brought that up as an example. So we are working on options, even if there's a sewer line near the curb, with the options that the water services come up with the table of different trees that you can use, with the mitigation factors. We can work on, I think we can get there. We can get to the walkable urban code shade requirements, given the combination of the public utility easement, the sidewalk easement, and the structures we can do off a building. We can get to those shade requirements, even with the sewer line very close to the property.
We've talked to horticulturists who said there are desert trees that can get, as long as the water lines are not already leaking, can stay within, that are nowhere near 10 foot, and that's just not realistic.
Right, so as Brandy said, the current recommendation is 6 feet with the mitigation processes and the certain types of trees, the tree root barrier and other things that she listed. We can put a tree within 6 feet of that sewer line, so we can do that. And then on the other side of the sidewalk, we can do the other items that I had pointed out. So I think we can still get there.
Can you talk, maybe I misunderstand how expensive these mitigation efforts are. Could you help me understand?
Well, the recommendation list is not going to be any, though that cost isn't any different than the other type of trees. It's still, trees are on the list. It's just going to be a shortened list of recommended trees. So the tree cost is itself. The other measures can be a little more expensive. It really depends on how the distance between the utility and the tree, and how far out you need to come and how far down you might have to dig some of these things. Some of them are easier. For instance, the root soil structure piece is a lot easier if it's a new tree and it's part of what you can do to put the tree in and when you build the tree and put it in. The more costly ones come where you already have trees and the infrastructure there and you try to mitigate that, because you're not building anything. I don't know that we have costed out all the different applications yet. We're still going through that process with our consultant to figure out which alternatives we're going to use under different scenarios and those kind of things. So we're still looking at that.
And is that part of the design standards?
Yes. And so we'll have, in the design standards, we're looking at several different options. We're looking at when we're putting a new water or sewer line in, what kind of mitigation might we do for areas where there's already trees and new lines coming in. We're also looking at if new trees are coming in, what kind of mitigation would need to happen. And that will all be detailed in specifications and specs that a landscape architect or our engineers can use to mitigate any issues.
Madam Chair, Councilman Gallego, I know that the Street Transportation Department has done, along with some of my staff, been involved in a more detailed study of that East Van Buren corridor. So we know a little bit more information, and we can set up a meeting to talk with you specifically about the Van Buren corridor once we have the plans in front of us to show us where those lines are and have a little more detailed look about how some of that may play into exactly what we know is their related infrastructure. And so we'd be happy to sit down with you and present some of that information.
That might be a good case study, because I'm worried about how this would apply and what it wouldn't allow to happen, so.
Yeah. I think
And
that'd
I'm
be
worried
great.
about the cost. Because in the long run, that will prohibit the mileage that gets completed, so. I'm very concerned about that, so if you'd let me know, I'd appreciate it too.
Okay.
Councilwoman Pastor, did you have a question?
Well, what I'm worried about is that I have constituents that want to start and want to put trees everywhere and shade and begin the reinvent process. So I'm happy that we're dialoguing and getting here, because they're ready to go down the core and make that a shaded, walkable area without realizing the dynamics of the utilities. And so that's what's happening right now in dialogue as to we're ready to go. We have found somebody that will donate trees. We found somebody that is going to help us put them there, and then you can't do it due to utilities. So that's the opposite dialogue I'm having, in the sense of, okay, let's slow down and let's look at what we need to do. So I'm happy that we're having this dialogue and getting there, and be able to have some coordination and standards, so that when those that are up and going and ready to go, they know what the guidelines are. And so thank you for getting there and doing this. What do you need from us?
I think they need direction to go forth, but
Okay.
continue along this way, is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
But I truthfully, when you get either very close or to the end, I would like to have you bring it back and explain to us what the codes will be and the final design standards.
Madam Chair, we're happy to do that.
Any further questions? Okay. Thank you very much. We have no cards, so I think that's all the direction we have to do today, because it isn't posted for action.
Yeah.
We will go to item 7, which is the water treatment plant infrastructure renewal program. It's a mouthful. You know, Catherine comes in many shapes and forms today.
I know, she was here earlier. She's there. Oh, there she is. I was like, she was here earlier.
Hello, my name is Troy Hazen. I'm the Assistant Director of the Water Services Department, and this afternoon I have Amy Conroy, the Deputy Director of Water Engineering. And we're here to talk about the infrastructure renewal program at the water treatment plants. This program looks at rehabilitation and replacement of aging infrastructure at the 4 water treatment plants that the city owns and operates. It's a large portion of our capital program. I think over the 10-year period accounts about 20% of the capital program. So Amy will go through some slides to kind of explain how we do things.
All right, so this is basically a reinvention of our existing, This is a reinvention of our existing rehabilitation and replacement program, so much so that we renamed it to an infrastructure renewal program. Like Troy said, we have 5 water treatment plants, 4 which we own, operate, and maintain, and 1 that is under contract with another provider. And we treat up to 700 million gallons a day. And we have approximately 20,000 assets at the 4 water treatment plants that we need to use to treat water to serve our customers. This is the locations that we have. We have the Val Vista plant that we share with Mesa, the 24th Street plant and the Deer Valley plant that are on the SRP system. Union Hills, that's in the northern portion of Phoenix and is off the CAP system, as well as Lake Pleasant. Currently, we are focusing this program on Union Hills, Deer Valley, and 24th Street, as well as Val Vista. We have 2 different levels of renewal. We have a renewal system that deals with the major systems, where we're looking at large portions of the plant, that we're doing a 4-year rotation, so that we're only working on 1 treatment plant at a time to help us with short shutdowns. And then we have a smaller system that is more of a rehabilitation of less complex things that are in the $100,000 range, $200,000 range, pump replacements, easier things that we deal on an annual basis at all 4 treatment plants. This is our total budget over the 10-year process starting next year. We have a total of $314 million. Lake Pleasant is zero because we do not operate and maintain that facility. It's currently under contract, so we'll start looking at our replacement needs if we take that contract over, which would be towards the end of this planning period. One of the things that we're doing is we're looking at things on an asset management basis. So we're looking at how we can kind of even out the amount of work that we do at facilities. And this is kind of an example that we did back in 2007 at our 24th Street plant, where we kind of look at what our replacement needs and kind of trying to level them out. As I said, we're using asset management. We're strategically maintaining and rebuilding our water treatment plants. We're aligning our maintenance programs to increase the life of the infrastructure, and we're looking at our renewal based on age, the actual condition, how important the piece of equipment or the process is, and then what kind of risk it causes if something fails. This is just a quick overview. This is 24th Street. It's our oldest plant right now. It's built in 1959. It's off the SRP system, and it's 140 million gallons a day. This is Deer Valley. Deer Valley was completely rebuilt about 4 years ago now, and it's 100 million gallons a day, also off SRP. Union Hills or Val Vista, which we share with Mesa, is 220 million gallons and was built in 1975 and has been expanded rapidly since. Union Hills was our first treatment plant on the CAP system, was built in 1986. And then Lake Pleasant, which is our newest plant, and is 80 million gallons a day. The next are just a series of pictures that show what kind of things we're replacing. This is Val Vista. We're currently in design to do some major rehabilitation or renewal projects. This is some sludge collectors in a basin, as well as some piping that needs some supports. This is another look at the collectors. Basically, as we coat metal, but as you have water and chemicals, they get degraded and eroded, and you need to go in and replace them or renew them. And what we'll do is we'll basically bring this down to bare metal and then recoat them. This is an example of one of our smaller projects that we did. This is a leaking gate. You can see the water flowing out of the gate, and this is after the repair. When we replaced it, you don't see water in a nice shiny gate, or valve actually. These are some flocculators at 24th Street. We're just starting construction on this. A flocculator is, I'm sorry, a flocculator is in the pre-treatment part of our system. It's where we first add chemicals and then we mix it slowly and rapidly in all kinds of ways so that we start getting turbidity and organics to settle out of the water so it can be removed by the filters. I'm sorry, I think everyone's a water engineer. We're also looking at things such as the concrete. We changed chemicals, so we have some erosion on our concrete due to chemical corrosion. This looks really bad. You can see that pen, but when you actually look at the structure of the concrete, it's very stable, but it doesn't look so good. So we're trying to guard against it becoming a bigger problem. One of the other things that we're looking at is electrical safety. So we have a very large arc flash program so that we don't have those types of things. You see the big flash, and we burn out our equipment, which causes plants to go down. So we're also looking at arc flash safety, if I remember right. Anybody have any questions? Flocculation, I'm sorry.
I'll use that in my house. Yeah, I love it. And I love turbidity. So, do you have any questions?
Could you talk a little bit about how much on-site water storage there is at the plants?
At the treatment plants, let's see, I have to add in my head. We have
maybe in days or how,
in days.
Or how long?
One day.
So approximately we have about 40 million gallons at every water treatment plant,
right.
but then we have distributed storage throughout the system.
Or 700 million.
Right, and so about 700 million gallons of storage, and a peak day is about 400 million gallons.
Something, so a little over a day.
Okay.
On the peak side. On the average day, it would be more than that, but we don't necessarily have the reservoirs full all the time.
So on average, it's probably in the 2 to 3 day range.
We were just having conversations separately about stormwater management.
Oh,
and
right.
I was just trying to understand.
But from a water quality
if we're creating a crisis by.
Right.
Right. So one of the things that we have, I think Blandy was alluding to it, is we have the reservoirs that offer a buffer as there are storms that come in. Let's say we ordered water yesterday and then a storm comes in that was unpredicted. Mm-hmm. We do have buffers in the reservoirs that allow the reservoir level to come up and come down that the plants wouldn't necessarily have to adjust. We would have that buffer in the system to allow us to continue on at that steady rate, even though the demands have dropped off.
So we have adequate capital to address.
Yes, we do.
And then you don't have to give specifics, but I am always trying to be an advocate for making sure on cybersecurity that we're making the investments we need. And you don't have to say if we've made them or not, but
Right, correct.
I think that's a priority for the council.
Councilman Gates, did you have any questions?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Just a question, because obviously, as you've discussed here, we have the Lake Pleasant facility that's currently being operated. Is it EPCOR?
American Water, Councilman Gates.
American Water?
Yes.
Okay. So they're currently operating it, but then the others are operated by the city of Phoenix. So can you talk about, or I guess maybe this could be another item where we kind of discuss the efficiencies of having, this outsourced versus the water department operating it themselves, and what the timing would be to consider, because I think there was a reference on whether we would continue to outsource the Lake Pleasant or not. So maybe you could at least touch on that a little bit, and maybe that could be a further discussion at another time.
Sure. The plant came online in 2007, and it was a 15-year contract that we had for the operation phase of that. As you remember, it was a design, build, operate contract that was signed in 2004. So the contract itself to operate the facility extends out to 2022, in which American Water is responsible for the operation and maintenance of the facility. The City of Phoenix, under that contract, pays for the water and the electricity associated with the water order, and American Water holds everything else, the chemicals and the maintenance and everything. A few years back, we did an analysis of what it would take the city to operate it, and so that's something we definitely could come back and share about our thoughts on that contract.
And then kind of the other side of it then too, is that something that we ever looked at the other plants and whether outsourcing would pencil out?
That hasn't been done in a very long time. As I remember, that was probably done in the early 90s or so.
Mid to late 90s, we looked
Probably
at
the
that.
last time that conversation was had.
Would you like information brought back on that too?
I would. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we'll have that scheduled on, if you let me know when you have
schedule
the
something.
information available, we'll schedule it.
Okay.
I think it's very interesting. I know that I have toured the one in the far north, and when built was anticipated the growth was going to continue up I-17, and then it slowed down. So I understand why it's a smaller capacity and being run the way it is. But I also want to thank you for taking my constituents on a tour of the Deer Valley plant.
Sure, yeah.
It was very interesting. I think it was spotless. You just can't believe how clean. I mean, whether it was the grounds or inside or you looked in the tank, everything was perfect. It was very impressive. Huge. I had no idea how large that facility was. From the outside, it's very deceptive. You go in there. I know everyone was very impressed, right down to the little fish that looked really healthy and glowing in there with the engineers, making sure the water was safe. So if the fish were floating, we were in big trouble.
It is.
So any other questions, comments? Okay. Well, I thank you very much for your presentation today, for the information. Any future items that we haven't talked about? Okay. Any public here that wants to talk? I don't have any cards. I don't see anyone raising their hand and jumping in. So we are adjourned.